This podcast contains adult themes and may be disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised.
Welcome to Class A Felons, B Films, C Cups. I'm your hostess, Paris Brown, and this is part 7 of our first season, Accessories to Murder. This episode is titled, Cinnamon Brown, Named for Fame, Blamed for Infamy. I'd like to dedicate this episode to David Nelms and Lisa Offenbacher. David and Lisa were both kind enough to leave 5-star reviews on our Facebook page. This is so appreciated, because we know how time-consuming everyday life can be, and your willingness to set aside some of that time to recommend us is extremely helpful in adding listeners and encouraging to us in this endeavor. Long before Cinnamon Brown was born in the first half of the 20th century, Orange County lived up to its name. Residents of next-door Los Angeles County would make leisurely Sunday drives to the country, which referred to the orange groves that covered the Orange County landscape. In 1955, Walt Disney opened the most magical place on earth, Disneyland, catapulting Orange County into a top tourist destination. By the 1980s, both urban and suburban sprawl had consumed the northwest section of Orange County, where our story is set. On March 19, 1985, one of these suburban families was preparing for a long night. Like much of the population in the United States in 1985, they were obsessed with possessions. Their home was filled to the brim with heavy 1980s-style furniture and knickknacks, yet the house itself was unostentatious. It was located in Garden Grove, which along with Buena Park was largely considered a lower rent area at the time, much more aesthetically aligned with its neighbor, southeast Los Angeles, than the arguably snootier Orange County. Garden Grove is a small city that borders Anaheim to the south, which is the home of Disneyland and the Los Angeles Angels baseball team, which was once owned by cowboy actor Gene Autry and briefly by the Walt Disney Company. It's also known as a setting in the 1996 song Garden Grove by local band Sublime, and is home to our favorite Elvis-themed Mexican restaurant, Azteca. But Garden Grove was also home to a dangerously manipulative man, David Brown, who had tired of his much younger wife, Linda, and was having an affair with her teenage sister, Patty. He decided he wanted Linda dead. In a twisted and cowardly attempt to keep his own hands clean, he convinced Cinnamon, his 14-year-old daughter from a previous marriage, to do his dirty work for him. And that's how this story begins. But first, let's take a look at Cinnamon's early life. Part 1. Background. Cinnamon Darlene Brown was born on July 3, 1970, at Harbor General Hospital in Torrance, California. Torrance is located in what's known as the South Bay area of Los Angeles because of its close proximity to the ocean in the southern part of the county. I've been to Harbor General as a visitor, not a patient. I'm familiar enough with it to say that they do good work there and save lives. But it's not the place to go if you want to have one of those decorated delivery rooms with a sofa bed, a rocking chair, and walnut cabinets that hide all of the medical equipment. It's safe to say that Cinnamon's mother, Brenda, probably didn't have the most comfortable time there, especially since her new husband, David, claimed he didn't have the stomach to stay with her, either during her 2 days of labor or for the childbirth. Cinnamon's mother, formerly Brenda Kirkus, and Cinnamon's father, David Arnold Brown, were both 17 when she was born, and had been married for a little less than 2 months, although they'd dated since they were 15 and ran away from home to live on the road together at 16. They were both from large and economically deprived families. Brenda was the eldest of 11 children, and David the 6th of 8 children. David's father was a white Midwestern mechanic, and his Mexican-American mother a former field worker turned housewife. David never made it past the 8th grade. He bragged that he worked as a dishwasher in a cafe and at a gas station at the age of 11 in order to buy himself nice clothes. The two teens decided to create their own family with their only child, who, as Brenda much later explained, was named Cinnamon because, quote, "It was pretty and it was different, and we wanted her to be special. In case she was ever famous, she would have that special name." Cinnamon had olive brown eyes and inherited the dark hair of both her parents. From her birth, Cinnamon was a lively, happy-go-lucky child. Her parents took fast food and odd jobs wherever they could, but they mostly depended on public assistance, including food stamps, to get by. But having a child seemed to motivate David to acquire his GED and enroll in a work incentive program, which allowed him to begin training at the Control Data Institute in Los Angeles to work in the burgeoning computer industry. Meanwhile, Brenda worked an office job. Their marriage ended after 3 years, when David asked Brenda permission to, quote-unquote, date other women, and then began having an affair with a young woman named Lori. He had already introduced Cinnamon to her. During the ensuing breakup, David once held a gun to Brenda's head after she moved out of their apartment in Long Beach, which is in South Los Angeles County and borders Orange County. Brenda had taken all of the furniture while he was at work. When she defiantly told him to go ahead and shoot, he dropped the gun. He then sued for sole custody of his daughter, and was shocked when Brenda was appointed Cinnamon's primary custodian, while David was allowed to have her on weekends only. David was the fun parent who had weekends off and played with his daughter like he too was a child. During the week, when Cinnamon lived with her mother, Brenda was often harried and short-tempered, with juggling work and domestic responsibilities. David and Lori married immediately after his divorce from Brenda. They moved to a rental house in Riverside, California, which is 60 miles, or about 97 kilometers northeast of Long Beach, in 1974. He was 22 and she was 19. 2 houses down lived the Bailey family. The head of the household was Ethel, and she had 11 children. Her second partner, Clyde Dalrymple of Pennsylvania, who was the father of her younger children, had abandoned the family, leaving them impoverished. They had just enough money to buy cereal, rice, noodles, and potatoes for their meals, and cigarettes and beer for the overwhelmed Ethel. As would be the case with all of David's marriages, 6 in total, this union with Lori did not last very long. While Lori went to work each day, David cozied up to the Bailey family down the street. He paid particular attention to an older sister, Pam, who was about 15 or 16 when the Browns moved into town. Her mother, Ethel, didn't mind because David told her he was dying of colon cancer and needed housekeeping help. In return, he bought the Bailey children food and gifts. So at first, he just seemed like a charming and generous man in a pitiable condition. When Cinnamon, aged 4, came to visit, he'd play a game with her and the youngest Bailey child, Patty, who was 7. The game was called Cinnamon Kisses, and the objective was to see which girl could kiss him on the lips the longest without laughing. At some point, and it appears that this was also during his marriage with Lori, he briefly dated the teenaged Pam. David would have been about 22. He soon moved on to her 14-year-old sister, Linda. When Linda was 16, she asked her sister-in-law for advice about birth control. In 1979, when she turned 17, David was 26, and they convinced Ethel to allow them to marry in Las Vegas following David's divorce from Lori. David's third marriage lasted only 1 month and 24 days before he sent Linda back home to Ethel. He blamed her, quote, immaturity and lifestyle. Linda was so devastated that she immediately dropped 22 pounds, which would be below a recommended body weight. In May 1980, just 8 months after suing Linda for divorce, David briefly married a 4th time. But despite the failure of these marriages, his professional life was taking off. At the dawn of the tech boom, apparently few people knew how to handle computer crashes that resulted in loss of data, and apparently everyone else constantly lived in fear of this problem occurring. David worked as a subcontractor for a computer company called RandomX in Signal Hill, an upper-class area of Long Beach. One of the company's specializations was the retrieval of lost data from damaged computer hard drives and floppy disks, those gigantic, flimsy pieces of plastic that have long since been replaced by technology like USB drives and the cloud. Incorporating the knowledge he gained at RandomX, David began his own data recovery company called, fittingly enough, Data Recovery. He had a super secret technique to salvage lost data called the process that simply required applying rubbing alcohol and/or dishwashing soap to the disk with a Q-tip. This method had a 40 to 60% success rate, but David was able to charge large fees up front to desperate clients. RandomX would later deny David's claim that he had invented the process on his own. David liked to brag that the Pentagon and the Coca-Cola Company often called him for his services, that he was contracted to recover lost data from the 1986 Challenger space shuttle tragedy, and that he assisted in locating and rescuing people in the devastating 1980 Las Vegas MGM Grand Hotel fire by quickly reconstructing room occupant files. I was unable to confirm any of these claims. His annual earnings rose from just over $11,000 in 1981 to over $171,000 in 1984, which would be nearly $408 US in today's money. Meanwhile, he mocked the fact that his ex-wife Brenda, Cinnamon's mother, was still stuck with the old furniture from their first apartment together. In 1982, David remarried Linda Bailey. She broke up with another boyfriend to return to her ex-husband, and when her family questioned this decision, she told them that David, quote, was going somewhere. His financial security was helping to increase his desirability. A few months before they remarried, David suggested that Linda's youngest sister Patty, who was now 13, come to live with them. She didn't get along with her mother, and as it was later revealed, one of her brothers had been allegedly molesting her. Around this time, David gave Ethel Bailey a sum of money, ostensibly to start a gardening business, which never took off. He later told Patty that the money was payment for her, that her mother had sold her to David for $5,000. It was later revealed that David too had been molesting Patty since the age of 11. At the time of their remarriage, Linda was trim and petite, weighing about 127 pounds. David, at 5 feet 7 inches, had short legs and was extremely portly. He tended to wear slacks with pocket polos that stretched tightly across his stomach. These pockets were always stuffed with a pack of cigarettes. He liked flashy jewelry and always wore a gold chain with a phoenix pendant. He was known as a hypochondriac and complained of numerous health issues, including high blood pressure, colitis, insomnia, headaches, a kidney disorder, asthma, allergies, depression, and many other problems. By the age of 32, he already looked like a man in his 50s. He had thin, dark brown hair and chain-smoked, ate fast food almost exclusively, and didn't exercise. His face was scarred from previous bouts of acne, and he seemed to be constantly perspiring. As the 70s turned into the 80s, David became fascinated with New Age fads and wooed women by telling them that they'd known each other in past lives and were soulmates. He claimed that an alien from another planet was helping him write a science fiction novel that would help save the Earth from some catastrophe. He had no male friends and vastly preferred the company of women. David strongly disliked being alone and craved constant companionship, which explains why, from the age of 17, he was never without a romantic partner, and why, even as an adult, he always needed to have his parents at his beck and call. His daughter Cinnamon described herself at age 14 as occasionally hyper to the point of obnoxiousness and a quote-unquote brat, because she was accustomed to going to the beach every day to get a tan, which, while a very 1980s thing to do, hardly seems like bratty behavior to me. She was an extrovert, mischievous, flippant, and known for playing harmless pranks at school, but she largely got along with others, including her stepmother. Her grades weren't great. They were mostly B's and C's, with 2 F's in history and math. She would never even consider using drugs, and had never taken a drink of alcohol, quote, except once or twice on New Year's Eve. She considered herself a Catholic. She liked to collect stamps. As a child of the 80s and of Southern California, she loved new wave music, and her sentences often ended with an upward inflection. For years, she was shuttled back and forth between her parents' homes. Although she and her mother were close and she felt comfortable confiding in her, Brenda was now a factory worker for a vitamin company and also a new mother again to Cinnamon's baby sister Penelope. Brenda had married a struggling musician a few years her junior. Always stressed, she had a tendency to yell, and it got on Cinnamon's nerves. At these times, Cinnamon would sometimes leave Brenda to stay with David for a while. In the summer of 1984, Linda gave birth to a daughter, Crystal Marie, Cinnamon's second baby sister. During her pregnancy, she requested that Patty return home to the Bailey household, but David refused to let the 16-year-old leave. Cinnamon's 14th birthday, she was staying full-time with her mother, but just in time for the new school year, she moved to her father's already crowded home in Garden Grove. In the fall of 1984, Cinnamon started the 9th grade. There are conflicting accounts as to whether she began her first year of high school at Loara High in Anaheim, near her mother and new stepfather's home, or at Bolsa Grande High School in Garden Grove. Patty ostensibly attended this school, although she hadn't been in classes for several months, using the excuse that Linda needed help with her new baby. In the month of March, Cinnamon attended only 50% of the time, and David didn't really seem to care. This latest rental house in Garden Grove was a fairly plain green stucco single-story home with brick trim and a rusty white and aqua 14-foot Terry travel trailer parked in the backyard. Its 3 bedrooms were occupied by David and Linda in the master, baby Crystal in another room, and Linda's now 17-year-old sister Patty in the 3rd bedroom. Since there were no spare rooms, Cinnamon slept outside in the trailer at night and sometimes hung out there by herself during the day. It provided her with a sense of independence. The trailer was stuffed with a refrigerator, a stove, built-in bunk beds, a small TV, a radio, a heater, plush animals, clothes, records, books, and blankets, but it was all somewhat shabby-looking. Occasionally she slept inside the family home, in the trundle bed that slid out from underneath Patty's larger bed, but it was evident to everyone that Patty had sole ownership over that room. She kept it immaculate and filled with heavy maple furniture, a TV, a stereo, overpriced collector's dolls, and teen romance novels. I loved me some Sweet Valley High during that era too, but I haven't been able to confirm whether or not Patty was a fellow Elizabeth and Jessica fan. If Cinnamon thought it was strange that her father's sister-in-law had her own room, while she herself was treated a bit like a vagrant, she said nothing. In fact, she really didn't want to share a room with Patty. Unlike Cinnamon, Patty was an introvert and stayed in her room much of the time. In October 1984, Cinnamon filed a police report on a flasher she had encountered in a public space. A witness confirmed that she'd heard Cinnamon gasp and run away from the man. Her best friend since kindergarten, a girl named Krista, felt that David was too strict with Cinnamon. He didn't encourage her to make friends, and in fact, she only had 2 or 3 close friends. He didn't allow her to give out her address, and only a few people knew her phone number. Krista also noted that David was always grounding Cinnamon for, quote, the slightest things. On Friday afternoon, March 8, 1985, Cinnamon was grounded for not going home directly after school. Instead, she went to visit a boy she had casually dated on day visits to Disneyland and out for ice cream the previous summer. She called home an hour after school ended to ask if she could stay a little longer and spoke to David, who yelled, "You get your butt home." David put Cinnamon on restriction, which entailed no outgoing phone calls or seeing friends for 3 entire months, according to Krista, for talking back to him. In March 1985, Cinnamon was 14.5 years old, just over 5 feet tall, and 120 pounds. She had a sweet, still childish face, and brown hair with blonde streaks in her bangs that she wore parted on the side in typical 80s teen fashion. David began to tell Cinnamon and Patty that he feared his wife Linda wanted to kill him for insurance money. At first, Cinnamon laughed this off as a typically twisted joke of her father's, but one day Patty told Cinnamon and David that she'd overheard Linda on the phone with her twin brother. They were plotting to murder David. Again, Cinnamon scoffed. How could Patty have heard her brother's side of the conversation? However, David informed his daughter that it was kill or be killed. Either Linda would have to be gotten rid of, or he'd have to leave town forever, and she didn't want to lose her father, did she? Soon David was conducting brainstorming sessions with Patty and Cinnamon on how to murder his wife. He told the girls that one of them would have to do it because he had a weak stomach. The three discussed hitting Linda over the head with a heavy object, electrocuting her in the bathtub, pushing her off a cliff in the desert, and throwing her out of the family van while on the freeway. David's father was actually present when this last idea was broached. He later took Cinnamon aside and told her not to listen to her father because he was a sick man. However, Cinnamon couldn't shake her fear while at the same time wondering if Linda, always so kind and attentive, could really be capable of harming David. At one point, she later recalled, she flat out told Patty that she didn't believe Linda would ever kill her father. Patty replied, "You don't know Linda. I know Linda. She's my sister." Cinnamon, still trying to navigate the credibility of her father's claims, backed down, mumbling, "Fine, you know her, fine." She asked her father, "Do you want me to kill her?" David responded, "I want you to help, yes. If you feel you have the stomach for it, I want you to do it." Cinnamon told him that although she liked horror movies, she didn't in fact have the stomach for that. David ended the conversation with these words, "If you love me, you will trust me. Just believe what I say. I'm your father. I know what's best." Patty admonished her at times for her hesitation, telling her that she must not really love her father. David told Cinnamon that no matter which of them did the actual killing, she should take the blame for it. Since she was so young, she probably wouldn't even have to serve any time should she get caught. Cinnamon, who at first surmised the entire thing was a perverse joke, gradually became inured to the idea of killing Linda. Around this time, the entire family went shopping at a local Kmart. Linda hung back to change the baby's diaper in the van and would meet them in the store when she was done. Cinnamon went straight to the music section and then went looking for her father. At the back of the store she found him, passionately kissing Patty. He glanced up and met her stare. Cinnamon was so distraught that she blindly began to make her way to the exit, where she ran into Linda. She made up an excuse to go sit in the van. When they returned home, the observant Linda noticed Cinnamon was upset and tried to comfort her, thinking her stepdaughter had wanted something she hadn't been able to buy. Cinnamon refused dinner and went out to the trailer. David soon followed, apologizing, begging her forgiveness, and ordering her not to tell anyone about what she'd seen. Linda later tried to coax Cinnamon out of the trailer to eat dinner, but she had no appetite. Part 2. The Crime. March 18, 1985, was a rainy Monday. It was spring break at Cinnamon's high school, and Brenda stopped by so that Cinnamon could greet her great-grandmother and great-aunt, who were visiting from Utah. David's parents had also come over to spend most of the day at their son's house. Cinnamon wanted to visit with her relatives at Brenda's home, but there was no room in the car as it was piled with suitcases. Brenda promised she'd come back for her after dropping off the older women, but when she called later to confirm, David answered the phone and said that Cinnamon was asleep. I'm unsure what time this was, but it appears that Cinnamon stayed up late and did not take any naps that day. The Brown household had all played the card game Uno for hours, apparently, all except Linda, who had been in an uncharacteristically bad mood and refused to play, David said. Her demeanor appears to support her oldest sister Cheryl's later disclosure that they spoke on the phone that day while Linda cried and promised to see Cheryl the next day so they could talk privately. Cheryl believed that Linda wanted to make plans to leave David. At some point, Cinnamon went out to the trailer, taking her new Dachshund puppy with her. Later that evening, David's mother Manuela and Linda had a disagreement about whether to let the baby cry herself to sleep. David had sided with his mother, and Linda was hurt. His parents left around 9 p.m. David intimated to the officers later that he and Linda made up in the bedroom. Later forensic evidence showed no indication that this was true. Let's just leave it at that. According to Patty, Cinnamon was in the living room watching a movie called Wife for Sale when her grandparents left. I've checked, and the only movie I could find by this name is a 1973 Italian film called Il Magnate, which may have been syndicated for TV and dubbed in English. Around 11:15 p.m., while David and Linda were in their bedroom, Patty joined Cinnamon to watch MTV, but went to her room half an hour later. David claimed that at about 2:30 a.m., suffering from insomnia, he got up and left the house. It appeared that everyone was asleep. He bought snacks and comic books at a nearby convenience store, then took a leisurely drive south toward the ocean in Newport Beach. He then stopped to use a restroom at a Denny's 24-hour restaurant before returning home. When he stepped inside, the house was dark. Patty met him in the living room, crying and telling him that Cinnamon had tried to kill her. It was a cold and cloudless night. At 3:26 a.m., the Garden Grove Police Department received a call of a possible homicide. The entire neighborhood was eerily silent when the first responding officer arrived. David answered the door and, trembling and stuttering slightly, told Officer Halligan that he, quote-unquote, thought his wife had been shot and that she was in the master bedroom, but he was afraid to go look himself. Patty stood nearby, holding Crystal. She was sobbing hysterically. In the initial walkthrough of the house, after Linda had been found dead, one of the arriving detectives found 3 empty prescription bottles and a nearly empty glass of water. He noticed that the glass, a 1984 promotional Taco Bell tumbler, had an embossed picture of Lord Krug from Star Trek III on its side. The alien Klingon character, played by Christopher Lloyd, had a seriously receding hairline with straight dark hair, a mustache, and ridges on his forehead. And what is the only funny thing about this entire situation whatsoever, the detective did a double take. Lord Krug looks so extraordinarily like David Brown. Back in the living room, David was polite and cooperative with investigators. He acted completely resigned to the idea that Cinnamon had killed his wife and portrayed his daughter as an inexplicably angry and verbally abusive teen who didn't help around the house, didn't want to follow rules, and threatened suicide when offered counseling. He claimed she had problems in school and didn't get along with her stepmother. The cops began to imagine Cinnamon as a dangerous juvenile delinquent. Police found her several hours later, huddled inside the larger of 2 dog houses in the backyard. Cinnamon was crouched in a fetal position. She wore a sweatshirt and sweatpants, and a thin gold chain with a star charm holder, lying in a pool of urine and vomit with about 3 dozen expelled capsule casings. She was extremely drowsy, but seemed to welcome the presence of the detective, a complete stranger to her. In her hand, she clasped a pink piece of cardboard tied with a purple ribbon. In stark contrast with this girlish presentation, the writing on the cardboard alluded to what had happened to Linda. It read, in the round, bubbly printing ubiquitous to teen girls, "Dear God, please forgive me. I didn't mean to hurt her." Cinnamon was immediately transported to the Garden Grove police station. Her first question was to ask if her dad was okay. When this was affirmed, she asked about Linda, but the officer at intake made no response. Her hands were swabbed for gunpowder residue. The test would actually later come back negative, which would indicate that she hadn't fired a gun, although it's likely that her urine and vomit removed the traces of this forensic evidence. It should be noted here that David and Patty's hands were also tested, and both deemed positive for residue, although this interpretation of the test was later reversed. Cinnamon was allowed to change her clothes before sitting down for an interview. Detective Fred McLean attempted to question her with another officer standing by, but the process was regularly impeded by her vomiting and falling asleep. I'm not sure why she wasn't immediately taken to a hospital when she was located, since it was already evident that she'd ingested a whole lot of pills. But instead, Cinnamon stoically tried to answer questions. She was shocked to find out that Linda was dead. "Oh no," she responded, and that she was under arrest for murder. However, Cinnamon readily admitted shooting Linda. It was as if she disassociated the effect of Linda's death from its logical cause. She told police that she first fired inside Patty's bedroom, aiming at a wall, then went into the master bedroom where Linda was in bed asleep and shot at her twice. It was dark, so she didn't see any blood. A bullet was later found embedded in a stud in Patty's bedroom wall. The motive she provided for killing Linda was all over the place, actually a series of motives, none of which seemed plausible. Linda was jealous that she was a daddy's girl. Linda neglected Crystal and even hit the baby. Linda told her that she hated Cinnamon's guts and threatened to kill her if she didn't go back to her mother's home. None of this sounded like Linda or fit her personality. As the investigator questioning her became more and more confused, Cinnamon began to become lethargic. At one point in her semi-conscious state, she murmured, "Please don't let them get away with murder." But the investigator didn't ask her what she meant or to whom she was referring. At this point, it was 8:40 a.m., and Cinnamon's eyes began to unfocus. Her blood pressure dropped, and her pulse had slowed down. Paramedics arrived, and she was finally taken to the hospital. It was determined that Cinnamon had digested an unknown number of time-release caplets, but at least 36, of diazide, a diuretic used for treating high blood pressure, and 100 milligrams each of Darvocet, a painkiller. She was given an intravenous treatment and a vapor mask to treat her respiratory system from the chemical effect of the pills and was monitored for liver damage. She was under guard, booked in absentia into the Orange County Juvenile Hall while remaining in a hospital bed. David retained a criminal attorney for her. Just a day after Linda's death, Cinnamon's attorney arranged to have a psychiatrist evaluate her. The doctor could not find any evidence of psychosis or other mental illness, and finally posited that she may have been suffering from a clinical depression so profound that she may not have known the difference between right and wrong when she shot Linda. This is also known as the Monotone rule, and is often used to help determine whether or not a defendant is fit to stand trial. In separate police interviews, David and Patty both presented their best versions of a mentally disturbed teenager, but most of their examples of Cinnamon's behavior were laughable. David said she was stubborn, an adjective that applies to just about every teen girl. Patty described her as sullen, and insisted that Cinnamon talked to imaginary people more than real humans. Similarly, when interviewing people at Cinnamon's school, one acquaintance from class denounced Cinnamon as a strange girl because she had imaginary friends and went trick-or-treating the previous Halloween dressed as an old man. Quote, "I thought that was rather immature for somebody that age," said this most definitely incredibly mature 14-year-old. Oddly, on the night of the murder, David had called his father first, before dialing the police. He explained that in his panic, his father had been the first person he'd thought of, and so he contacted him for quote-unquote advice. This was doubly strange, because Arthur Brown was normally a laconic sort of man, who many regarded as dominated by his wife. Part 3. The Aftermath. An examination of Linda's wounds revealed that she was probably shot from a distance of about 6 to 15 inches. A very small amount of cocaine was found in her blood. Investigators were unsure as to how this could have been introduced into her body, but one of Linda's sisters-in-law would later say that Linda began using cocaine occasionally to lose weight after giving birth. After Linda's autopsy, a memorial service was held at a Garden Grove chapel. David and Patty went shopping at I. Magnin to pick out a lace-trimmed blue dress for Linda during the open casket funeral. He asked Patty if she would try it on first, as she and Linda were nearly the same size, but she refused. The hired clergyman, who didn't know David or Linda, was briefed on Linda's life history by David's sister. Oddly, the immediate family sat behind a screen during the funeral, hidden from view. The minister mentioned that David and Linda's relationship had been a, quote, rocky road, and suddenly a hiss could be heard from behind the screen. David beckoned the embarrassed minister over to him. After a whispered conference, the Reverend returned to the pulpit to announce that he had been mistaken. The Brown marriage had in fact been perfect. Then David had Linda cremated. Her ashes were interred in the base of a fountain in a Newport Beach cemetery. In a related twist, the company that cremated her, Coastal Crematory, was the same one run by one David Sconce, whose family owned the infamous Lamb Funeral Home in Pasadena, California. Sconce, at the very same time that Linda was cremated there, was mutilating corpses to steal gold fillings, was illicitly cremating piles of corpses together, and was taking other valuables off of dead bodies entrusted to him, although there's no way to know whether Linda's remains were affected. And oh yes, we already have an episode in the works that covers this macabre tale, especially since my sister and I were actually inside the Lamb Funeral Home once, met some of the family, and thus have a personal anecdote to tell you. So we'll look forward to sharing that with you in an upcoming episode. Back to our current tale. That summer, David received 4 different life insurance payouts for Linda's debt, totaling nearly $844,000 US, an unusually large amount for a young and uneducated housewife. He professed that he'd taken out so much life insurance on his wife because she was a brilliant assistant, the only other person who knew the secret formula to his much-touted process of data recovery. Right after Linda's funeral, he purchased a new Nissan 300 ZX Turbo with vanity plates Data Rec. That's Data REC. Between 1985 and 1988, he bought a total of 15 expensive vehicles, including 3 additional Nissans, a $70,000 Mercedes, and a $60,000 fully equipped motorhome. Shortly after the murder, David left the home he'd shared with Linda and briefly moved into a rental house. This is understandable. Many widowed spouses find it difficult to live alone with their memories in a site that their loved one once enlivened. But David wasn't alone. Along with his infant daughter, he brought along his sister-in-law. Meanwhile, Patty began appearing in public wearing clothes and jewelry that had belonged to Linda. Cinnamon's bench trial in the Juvenile Division of Orange County at the Santa Ana Central Courthouse began in August 1985, just after she turned 15 years old. Patty was one of the witnesses for the prosecution. There were slight deviations in her recollection of the tragic night's events, but she was steadfast in her declarations that Cinnamon was often moody and depressed in the weeks leading up to the murder, although she was no longer sure that Cinnamon was the shooter. Her affect on the stand was flat and robotic. David was subpoenaed to testify, but his doctor sent word to the judge that he was ill. In fact, he never attended the trial at all until sentencing day. The judge granted a request that his testimony be offered by stipulation. What this means is that the district attorney read into the trial record what David would have testified to, according to previous interviews, if he had been on the stand. And David's testimony, disembodied words that hung unpleasantly over the courtroom, stated that his wife and daughter did not get along and that Cinnamon resided in the backyard trailer because it kicked her out of the house. The judge found Cinnamon guilty of first-degree murder. The second phase of her trial consisted of evidence presented to determine her sanity. Cinnamon's mother, Brenda, was the first witness. David had visited her beforehand, and although they both knew that Cinnamon was emotionally sound, he convinced Brenda that she needed to present their daughter as quote-unquote weird in order to save her from prison. I'm assuming he meant mentally disturbed. So Brenda tried to mention all of her daughter's typical teenage blow-ups and backtalk. There was also an argument that ensued once when Cinnamon had stayed out late. Brenda had slapped her. Cinnamon had attempted to slap her mother back, and she had been sent to her father's to stay. However, Brenda had come to pick up Cinnamon most weekends, and they talked often on the phone. Patty testified again that her step-niece had bizarre conversations with imaginary friends, and David's mother backed up this example of Cinnamon's purportedly delusional behavior. For the defense, a psychologist from the Orange County Department of Mental Health, Dr. Howell, testified that not only had he talked with Cinnamon, but he assessed her father as well to determine a familial or background history of the defendant's emotional makeup. In their session, David revealed extensive family and personal patterns of physical, sexual, and drug abuse. As I mentioned earlier, his father Arthur was generally known as a good and gentle man, and was also somewhat afraid of David, so it may be that the alleged abuse came from someone else in the family. I've also read that it may have possibly been a neighbor who sexually abused him. David had been admitted to psychiatric hospitals 3 times in his life on suicide watch and for threatening to kill Cinnamon's mother. Dr. Howell had also recently filed a child abuse report against David, after David recalled that when Cinnamon was 12, he'd once pulled her pants down and forcefully spanked her bare skin with a belt, humiliating her in front of the family in order to make her cry, which she refused to do. Howell testified that David told him, quote, "Cinnamon is about as capable of hurting others as I am. And in my opinion," the psychologist continued, "he is capable. His past history documents that. So it was kind of a strange statement for him to make." Howell had administered 7 standard psychological tests to Cinnamon, all of which indicated normal ranges of intelligence and behavior. She also underwent EEG and CAT scan testing for potential neurological damage. Those were also normal. However, on the 3rd test, Cinnamon had temporarily refused to continue and challenged the psychologist. Quote, "What are you going to do? Hit me?" She was also now denying that she had ever confessed to murdering Linda and claimed that she didn't remember the shooting. Howard's tentative diagnosis then was isolated explosive disorder, the type of behavior that might be exhibited in a rage incident by an individual with no prior indications of violence. After Howell's testimony, Cinnamon's attorney read stipulated testimony from both David and Patty that in the weeks leading up to the murder, Cinnamon had talked to committing suicide by firearm. This information gave the DA's senior investigator, Jay Newell, who was sitting in the courtroom audience, pause. If this were true, why would Patty show Cinnamon how to use the gun on the night of Linda's death and then drift off to sleep without a care in the world? Why hadn't she immediately reported Cinnamon's interest in the gun after talking of suicide to either Linda or David? September 13, 1985 was sentencing day. In the courtroom were Cinnamon's mother, Brenda, her paternal aunt, her paternal grandfather, and a surprise visitor, her father, David. He seated himself directly behind Brenda. As the judge began to pronounce sentence upon his daughter, David teasingly reached out and tugged at the back of his ex-wife's hair, as though he were the boy in my first-grade class who sat behind me and pulled my braids to get a reaction. He was smiling at his own behavior as the judge sentenced Cinnamon to 27 years to life. Since she was a juvenile, it was likely that she'd be released at either age 21 or 25, rather than age 42 or older. By the time Cinnamon had the presence of mind to look around the courtroom, David had already left. She was remanded to the custody of the California Youth Authority at the Ventura School in Camarillo, 85 miles or 137 kilometers north of Garden Grove. Afterwards, in the courtroom parking lot, Detective McLean chatted with Brenda and David's older sister, Susan. It was the first time he had met Susan, and she had a lot to say. Like the rest of the family, she was devastated by the entire case. She recalled that she had last seen Linda the month before her death, and her sister-in-law had been fighting a lot with David and was, quote-unquote, miserable. Susan claimed that Linda and Cinnamon got along fine, however, and that the real problem was Patty. According to Susan, Cinnamon had to sleep in the trailer only because Patty insisted on having her own room inside the house. David had opted to banish Cinnamon to the backyard rather than make Patty share. Susan also had second-hand information from Linda that Patty had somehow killed a dog that belonged to Cinnamon. Susan believed that Patty was extremely competitive with Cinnamon, and that it was peculiar that Patty and David were still living together so long after Linda's death. As with Brenda, David had instructed his sister just hours after the murder to describe Cinnamon as disturbed and suicidal if questioned by police. Finally, Susan confided that when she was a teenager, David, who was 17 at the time, tried to molest her and had once threatened to rape her. In August 1985, 5 months after the murder, David and Patty were moving on up to Anaheim Hills, an upper-middle-class brand-new subdivision with winding roads that literally look down upon the urbanity of Anaheim and its surrounding Orange County cities. David purchased a nouveau Tudor home and moved his parents in to help take care of Crystal, along with the ever-present Patty. No one informed Cinnamon of the move or gave her the new home phone number. She was instructed to call David's answering service if she ever needed to get in touch. The only address she had for him was the post office box number for his business. As time passed, David's visits to Cinnamon became less frequent, although he allowed her to use his business account's Visa card to order whatever she was allowed in the institution. She bought a color TV, a Walkman, and pink curtains to cover up the bars on her room's windows. The Ventura compound had a pleasant view of lemon groves and artichoke farms. There, Cinnamon became a better student than she was in high school. She had a private room in one of the compound's so-called cottages, which were actually brick buildings, and worked out with weights. She later began to work part-time as a remote TSA reservations clerk and sang in the prison choir. The white inmates invited her to join their gang, called White Car, but she declined. The only other thing she didn't participate in was counseling, because she refused to discuss Linda's murder. On the infrequent occasions that David visited, he cautioned her to always repeat that she didn't remember anything. She began to feel that she was safer on the inside, in prison, and keeping what she knew bottled up inside as well. Her only regular visitor was her mother. Since Linda's death, David had come to expect Patty to take care of his every whim, no matter how ridiculous. One book on the case, titled A Killing in the Family, which I'll list in the sources section of our website, claims that Patty's household duties included sleeping with him, waiting on him all day long, getting his meals, cleaning up after him, fetching his slippers, trimming his toenails, and flushing his toilet after he'd used it. And yet after all this, plus his previous molestation of her beginning at age 11, he was still a man Patty found desirable, and with whom she wanted to permanently link her life. On July 1st, 1986, David and Patty married in a secret Las Vegas ceremony at the We've Only Just Begun wedding chapel inside the Imperial Palace Hotel, now renamed the Link Hotel on the Strip. They were wed in front of a big heart-shaped backdrop, with the strains of Only You playing in the background. The only witnesses were a couple they knew who were expecting a baby, and they got into what David called the production line at the chapel for their own quickie Vegas marriage. After their wedding supper at a local hotel, Patty came down with food poisoning, a fitting reaction, I think, to becoming David's sixth bride. He made Patty sign a prenup, in which she had to agree that David would keep all the assets and property, which included his expensive home, his many cars, rare coins, and expensive jewelry. Patty would walk away with only a 1955 MG sports car and future proceeds from a collision in which she had claimed a whiplash injury. It was eventually Cinnamon's grandfather, Arthur Brown, who began providing her with bits and pieces of her father's life since she had been locked away. He had always doted on Cinnamon, calling her, quote, a very darling little girl, even when she was in prison. From him, she learned that Patty was still living with David in an impressive, grand new home. Furthermore, Grandpa Arthur grumbled, Patty, quote, had gone out and gotten herself pregnant, or, as is more biologically accurate, had been impregnated. David told everyone who would listen that this was the result of a relationship with a guy he referred to as Doug the Greek, who in typical 80s gigolo fashion was supposed to be the proud owner of either a Trans Am or a Camaro, but no one had ever seen or heard of Doug. Cinnamon suspected she knew the father's real identity. Arthur also insinuated that David and Patty sometimes neglected Cinnamon's little half-sister Crystal. On top of all of this, Cinnamon had a boyfriend in the institution. Their relationship consisted of brief conversations and correspondence whenever possible, but Cinnamon was distressed that he was about to be released and she would be staying behind indefinitely. She was discouraged that although she had made successful rehabilitation progress, the parole board had disregarded her hard work because she refused to talk about the shooting. She had developed a rapport with her latest parole officer, and with all these factors in play, decided it was time to disclose her father's role in Linda's murder. During Patty's pregnancy, she became so morose and frustrated over her isolation and the enforced silence on two of the happiest events of her life, her marriage and the anticipation of her child, that she attempted suicide. Her only friend, the only one whom David approved, was a young woman her age named Annie. She was the daughter of David's insurance salesman. One day while they were alone, Annie, not knowing anything about Patty and David's romantic involvement, marriage, or the paternity of Patty's child, confided in Patty that she was having an affair with David and was in love with him. Patty stoically said nothing. Patty and David's child, Heather Nicole, was born in September 1987. In July 1988, just after Cinnamon turned 18, she finally spoke openly to Jade Newell, the original DA investigator of Linda Brown's murder. For the first time, she told him that David had ordered the killing of his wife. She also said that it had been Patty who actually fired the gun, although Cinnamon had been instructed to take the blame. She talked so much that she finally asked Newell if she could go through his wallet, because he knew everything about her, yet she knew nothing about him. Newell obliged. The investigator asked her to invite David to visit her to talk about the murder. She agreed and left her father a message, telling him she urgently needed to speak with him in person, but didn't tell him why. On August 13th, the entire Brown family drove up to the Ventura facility. David and Cinnamon had a private talk at an outdoor visiting area, while his parents and Crystal stayed in the visitors' waiting room, and Patty waited with a baby in the motorhome. What David didn't know was that Cinnamon was wired, having agreed to cooperate with the Orange County District Attorney's Office. In part of the taped conversation, Cinnamon told David that she wanted to tell the authorities the truth after having spent the past 3 years incarcerated. David said that was fine, as long as she didn't tell the whole truth. Quote, "Then we'd all go to jail. That doesn't make any sense, because we didn't do anything wrong. Patty knows that I wouldn't stay here a week. She knows I'd kill myself. Do you see any reason for 5 people's lives to be ruined? For me to die now? Do you see any reason at all for us to go to jail because we knew it was going to happen beforehand?" Cinnamon replied, "I feel stupid because I was so young and I loved you so much that I was gullible enough to do it." David admonished her not to, quote, unquote, lose it, and maintained that he didn't give the girls any order to kill Linda. That the last thing he said before leaving the house that night was, "Don't do anything. I'm going to the beach and I'll figure something out." He also didn't recall giving Cinnamon any pills. He blamed the murder plot on Patty and concocted a truly bizarre story about Linda owing money to drug dealers and she and her brothers trying to take over his business and the mafia promising them money to kill David and turn the company over to them. Patty had just been trying to protect David. At the same time, while explaining Patty's loyalty, he offered her up as a trade, claiming he'd get Patty to confess to everything, as if the authorities would just let her serve Cinnamon's sentence for her. 2 weeks after this conversation, Cinnamon called David again and asked him to drive up that same day for a visit and to bring Patty along. He initially used depression as an excuse to stay home, citing how, quote, "This thing's tore my heart out so bad, not being able to see you and go to Disneyland and everything else with you." In spite of his many ailments, he showed up with Patty and little Crystal. Cinnamon was again wired, and prison personnel took surveillance photos of the group from a guard tower. Cinnamon immediately wanted answers from Patty about the new baby. When she asked who Heather resembled, Patty evasively joked, "A turd," before David changed the subject. When Cinnamon asked them to refresh her memory regarding the conversations they'd had about killing Linda, they stared at her blankly. They didn't remember anything. Linda? Who was Linda? Cinnamon asked incredulously, "You don't remember anything said at the house or when we were in the van or anything?" Patty responded vacantly, "The van?" Frustrated, Cinnamon shot back sarcastically, "Oh, now you're going to say, what van, right?" Suddenly, David brought up the plan he proposed at his last visit. Patty would take the entire blame for the murder. But, Patty argued, then they'll ask me, why did she take the pills? David instructed her to say she had given them to Cinnamon, while Cinnamon reiterated that she just wanted everyone to tell the truth. These taped conversations, along with other evidence picked up over the years, was enough for an arrest warrant for both David and Patty. They were picked up at the home they shared on September 22, 1988, and taken to separate interrogation rooms at the Orange County District Attorney's Office. Naturally, David first explained that he had a quote-unquote bleeding problem that would require frequent restroom visits. Understandably, the detectives declined to question him further on that. He acknowledged that he'd known of a quote-unquote plot between Patty and Cinnamon to kill Linda, but claimed he was helpless to stop it. He also remembered giving Cinnamon some pills that night, but said it was only aspirin. During Patty's interrogation, she admitted that some of her testimony at Cinnamon's 1985 trial was perjury. The investigators then played the first tape of David implicating her in the murder while talking to Cinnamon at the Ventura School. Without betraying any emotion, she asked for an attorney. The following month, with her father behind bars, Cinnamon finally felt safe enough to confess the whole truth to DA investigator Newell. She did, in fact, pull the trigger. She remembered everything. She had just been too ashamed to admit to him that she was the shooter. Under the law, however, David, who had convinced her to do it, and Patty, who had been nearly as haranguing and helped plan the murder, were just, if not more, culpable for aiding and abetting. Cinnamon recalled that just before David left for his drive the night Linda died, he said ominously, "You girls take care of business while I'm gone." He handed his daughter a small pillow and told her to shoot the gun through it. She assumed it was to muffle the sound. As soon as he left, Patty produced the gun. Cinnamon obediently crept to the master bedroom where Linda was asleep. It was dark, but Cinnamon knew exactly where she was lying on the bed. She shot in her direction, and the gun became stuck in the hole it produced in the pillow. She ran to Patty's bedroom where Patty was holding the baby. Both teens were struggling to untangle the pillow and gun, with Crystal between them when it went off again, burrowing into a tapestry hanging on the wall. It's horrifying to think of how easily they could have accidentally shot the 8-month-old. Then they heard Linda moaning in pain. Patty handed Cinnamon the gun and told her to go back to the master bedroom. The younger teen obeyed and shot her stepmother once more. Cinnamon also revealed that instead of having her take pills to feign a suicide attempt, David's original plan had been to have her shoot herself. He told her to try to, quote-unquote, nick herself in the head with a bullet, to make it seem she'd shot herself in remorse after killing Linda. But she'd refused, telling him she was too afraid. This made it chillingly clear for the first time that David had not intended for Cinnamon to survive that March night in 1985 either. Both David and Patty were held without bail and were tried separately. At one point, Patty tried to hang herself in her cell with a sweatshirt. In the months leading up to court proceedings, David, living in fear that Patty would turn on him, began inundating her with intra-jail correspondence. This consisted of articles on marital fidelity and loyalty from the Catholic Digest, transparently desperate letters, and cheesy poems. Sometimes, bizarrely, he would sign off on these as Doug, the man had fabricated as Heather's father, now his alter ego. In his more serious transmittals, as in the following letter, he was simply David. Quote, "I didn't mean anything when I said those things to Cinnamon. I was just trying to play along with whatever game she was playing this time." Letters from David purporting to relay messages from Doug were just as calculated, but even more ridiculous. Here's an example. Quote, "Doug says he will tell his family about you and him being married. okay? Personally, I can see in you the same things Doug does. Boy, does he ever think all the time about you. You are loving, caring, thoughtful, sharing, warm, mature, sweet, innocent, both mature and innocent, all right, pure, and beautiful. I must note that every single one of these adjectives is capitalized. Unfortunately for him, the way to a woman's heart is not spelled out with unnecessary capital letters. Patty decided to testify against him. At David's preliminary hearing, Cinnamon testified through tears, even having to leave the courtroom several times to compose herself, as her father, in a black suit, tie, and handcuffs, tried to stare her down. She avoided looking at him and testified that she never wanted to see him again. She also admitted that she had previously told so many lies that she didn't remember them all. When it was Patty's turn to testify, she refused to even glance David's way. On the stand, she finally revealed that David began molesting her at the age of 11, and they began having a full-blown affair under her sister's roof from the time she was 15. She confessed that although she loved Linda, she had loved David more, and thus would have done anything for him, including sororicide, the killing of one's own sister. Back in his jail cell, David, furious that Patty had the audacity to testify against him, concocted yet another plot. This time, not only would he have his current wife killed, but he'd make sure the prosecutor and lead investigator each suffered their own fatal setback in their case against him. He'd brown-nosed another inmate, Richard Steinhardt, a.k.a. Goldie, a.k.a. Liberty, once the youngest certified master of martial arts in the U.S., a 2-time national karate champion, world champion of the Universal Kinpo Kung Fu Association, nightclub bouncer, internal affairs officer of the Hessian outlaw motorcycle gang, gun runner, drug runner, former bodyguard for comedian Jerry Lewis, and a hitman. David offered Steinhardt $300,000 to have his connections on the outside kill these 3 people he believed stood between him and freedom, and to set his trailer on fire for the insurance money, and Steinhardt agreed to the deal. David even molded additional victims, including Cinnamon's mother, who had never forgiven for daring to divorce him so many years earlier, and 2 of Linda's brothers. However, a jailhouse snitch heard everything, and, well, snitched to the authorities. As law enforcement began to sort out this new development, Steinhardt picked up a newspaper one day and spotted an article about David. He read about his sexual molestation of the Bailey sisters, and threw the paper down, disgusted at, quote, that piece of caca. He later happened to tell the jail snitch about his outrage, vowing that he had never helped David with his hit list, and discovered that he and David had already both been turned in. This left him with no choice but to confess everything to the DA's office himself and cooperate in a sting operation. This involved moving Steinhardt to another jail under the pretense of having been released, stringing David along and getting him to discuss the plot over recorded phone calls, obtaining down payments totaling $23,000 from his brother and attorney, neither of whom knew anything about the plot, and briefly pretending that the job had been completed. David's original charges for the murder of Linda now included 3 additional counts of conspiracy to commit murder, 3 counts of solicitation to commit murder, solicitation to commit perjury, subordination of perjury, and conspiracy to commit arson. David's attorney immediately filed a motion to remove the prosecutor, Jeff Robinson, from the case, arguing that he would be hopelessly prejudiced as an alleged target of the murder plot. This was avoided by Robinson and the DA's office agreeing not to seek the death penalty against David. Patty pleaded guilty to her sister's murder. Although she was 21 now, she was charged as a juvenile, since she had been 17 at the time of Linda's death. She was sentenced to the Ventura Prison School where Cinnamon was incarcerated, and was released at age 25 with her criminal record expunged. She and Cinnamon saw each other only occasionally while imprisoned, but were friendly, although emotionally distant. After Patty's arrest, Cinnamon did reach out to her by sending a holiday greeting card, and Patty responded in turn. Both Cinnamon and Patty seemed to have suffered a sort of stunting in their emotional development, in that they both retained a childlike quality. It was not until April 1990 that David's trial began. Cinnamon, of course, was called to testify. She was now almost 20 years old and still incarcerated at the juvenile facility. She remained just over 5 feet tall, with thick hair nearly to her waist that was now bleached completely blonde and curled in long waves. She wore a high-necked peach dress and cream-colored high heels on her first day of testimony, and a royal blue mini dress with a ruffled peplum, a retro callback to the 1940s, on her second day. She looked impressive and fierce, although she was nearly stricken with nervousness. At times, tears ran down her cheeks as she once again recounted her story. At a tense moment in her testimony, the doors at the back of the large courtroom suddenly opened, and over 100 middle school students on a field trip trooped noisily in. Because this was a public trial, they had to be allowed to observe. However, as the gravity of what they were watching, a daughter testifying against her father, began to weigh on them, they soon quieted down. David showed no emotion while his daughter was in distress on the stand. He dressed daily for the trial in pastel shirts and dress slacks provided by his parents. His hair looked thinner and greasier than ever. It hung limply below his shirt collars. The defense portrayed Cinnamon as a habitual liar, a privileged, wealthy girl used to getting her way who viewed Linda as a threat to her cushy lifestyle, and brought up the by now tired old imaginary friends in an attempt to paint Cinnamon as mentally unstable. In Patty's turn on the stand, she testified that as a teen, she had tried to compete with Cinnamon to prove her love for David. A month before Linda's death, David had awakened Patty one night without Cinnamon's knowledge, handed her a gun, and told her that Linda, quote, had to be taken care of. Patty put the gun to Linda's back while she was asleep in bed and stood there for a few minutes, but she ultimately couldn't shoot her. Patty's account of the months leading up to the murder corroborated Cinnamon's, even though they hadn't had an opportunity for private communication since the night that Linda died. In September of 1990, David was found guilty of Linda's murder and sentenced to life without parole. 1 month later, he pleaded guilty to the murder-for-hire charges and was sentenced to 6 years in prison, which would run concurrent to his trial sentence. At his sentencing, the judge remarked, quote, "Mr. Brown, you're a scary person. I've seen it all, but for you to be able to get one of your own children to kill your wife, and your sister-in-law to assist in doing away with your own wife. Even Charlie Manson didn't use family. You make Charlie Manson look like a piker." In other words, a small-time criminal. Imagine being compared unfavorably to Charles Manson. Afterwards, David complained, "He didn't have to say that about Manson." In a jailhouse interview following the verdict, David expressed hostility towards Cinnamon, describing her as a violent, vicious, and verbally abusive teenager. He declared, "She knew I faced the death penalty at the time she changed her story. Her father could die, and she didn't care. She's cold and evil." He displayed none of the unconditional concern and love for his child that one would expect to see in a father. David died in March 2014 at age 61 of quote-unquote natural causes at the State Prison Hospital in Corcoran, California. A prison photo taken not long before his death showed a slightly thinner David with a much receded hairline, looking like a confused but still hardened little old man. Richard Steinhardt, the former biker who helped with the Hitman sting operation, became a devout Christian. He died of AIDS a few years after David's trial. Before he passed away, just after Cinnamon was paroled, she called him and asked for a meetup. They had dinner together. Cinnamon wanted to know if her dad had ever mentioned wanting to have her killed. Steinhardt assured her that he had not, and she seemed to find some comfort in that. Patty was paroled from the Ventura School in 1993 at age 25. She married a prison guard, regained custody of Heather, had twin sons, and appears to be doing well, all things considered. While imprisoned, Cinnamon earned her high school diploma and an Associate of Arts degree. When she heard that a fellow inmate was being molested by a counselor, Cinnamon lent the young woman her tape recorder, which provided evidence that led to the counselor's removal. After David's conviction, she mailed him a copy of the Catholic Confession Prayer, along with a short note signed, "Love Always, Cinny, 1990. She received no response, and that was her last correspondence to him. She obtained clerical work after her parole from the Ventura School in February 1992 at age 21 and married a barber. The couple lived in La Habra, California, just outside of Orange County, with their son until Cinnamon's husband sadly committed suicide in Las Vegas in March 2006. Cinnamon later remarried and had a daughter. As of last year, she was still living with her family in Orange County, near her mother and about 15 minutes away from me, in an upscale mobile home park. Her property was sold in September 2018, and I'm no longer sure of her exact whereabouts, but I hope she's doing well. The Brown family disowned her after David's arrest, and she has not maintained contact with Patty or her younger half-sisters Crystal and Heather. Despite Cinnamon's quick wit, she unwittingly became an accessory to murder. Manipulated at an extremely vulnerable age by her father, she didn't think much about what would happen after she pulled the trigger on his cowardly behalf. The teenage years exist on the brink of adulthood. At 14, you want to be entrusted with adult confidences, and you also want to feel secure in your parents' love. With David, Cinnamon could not be certain he would continue to be there for her if she refused to, quote-unquote, prove her love in this way. Even worse is the very premise of having to prove your love or loyalty to a parent in order to gain theirs in return. David put conditions on his affection, and those conditions were based on lies, all in order to satisfy his insatiable libido for teenage women. Everyone was dispensable to David, including his wives and children. That concludes today's blast into the uncanny past. If you've enjoyed our show, please subscribe, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, and consider rating us with 5 stars. Source information and further reading is listed on our website at classafelons.wordpress.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon with another story told with vintage flair and big hair.